Hello, Walk It Off fam. Hope you guys are enjoying your Friday evening. It is beautiful out here in Southern California. Um, Hope you guys are looking forward to the weekend. You kind of see the title of the video though. We are going to try to get back to our roots, and the reason why I kind of started this channel, people are always asking me, why did you call it Walk It Off? Like, what's the reason for that? Well, sometimes we may say a couple stuff that makes people feel a certain type of way. So I always tell people, hey, you know what? Feel some way about it, you'll be all right. Walk it off. Kind of take a deep breath and walk it off. You'll be all right. Get out of your feelings type deal. So that's what we're gonna do today. All right. Do me a favor. Put your feelings aside, and we're gonna react to this video. Matt Walsh. This one is particular to one of the interviews that he had. This is my first time watching it as well. I have seen the documentary. I don't know who the interview is with exactly, but we will try to break it down. If you guys have any questions, feel free to comment after the fact. I'll try to pause it as least as I can, but I'll give you my 2 cents kind of throughout the video. So without further ado, let's get right into it.
To a lot of people for my film, What is a Woman, which is streaming now exclusively on the Daily Wire. And
before anything, I'm just definitely going to recommend you guys watch the whole thing. It's dope. Amazing work. Maybe you don't agree with everything he says, but it makes you think, if anything. Ask questions,
And you go to whatiswoman.com and get signed up, and you can watch the film right now. Many of the conversations we had were unintentionally hilarious. Many were disturbing. Veering significantly over to the disturbing end of the spectrum is my interview with Dr. Michelle Forcier, who is, as you'll hear her proudly identify herself, a gender-affirming pediatrician and also an abortionist. We flew up to Providence, Rhode Island to speak with Dr. Forcier. She was, friendly enough at first. And what we found in many of the interviews that you'll see in What is a Woman is that gender ideologues are very polite and nice right up until the moment when you express any skepticism at all. But before we get to that point, where things...
So kind of other people are nice up until you question them or challenge them, which is a lot of people nowadays, right? As long as you kind of just go with the flow and don't question people, everything's cool. But the moment you start to ask questions, people kind of run or get offended for no reason, right?
Things really start to sort of fall apart. Let's get to know Michelle a little bit. Watch.
My name is Michelle Forcier, and I have a medical degree from University of Connecticut, residency, University of Utah Pediatrics, and I've worked for a number of different Planned Parenthoods for 20 years. I do advanced contraception and abortion, as well as gender hormones, and sort of looking at the whole sort of schema of gender, sex, and reproductive justice.
So you've done a lot of work in this field. Could you just start by telling us?
Sure.
Sorry, before anything. Is it bad to assume somebody's like stance on things just by noticing their hair color?
At what age can a child first begin to transition into another gender or identify themselves as a gender different from how they were born?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's research and data that show that babies and infants understand differences in gender. Some children figure out their gender really early, and
Sorry, how they understand gender?
the reason why we say, oh, that's interesting or important is because they're figuring out their gender identity is not necessarily congruent with their sex assigned at birth.
I'm sorry, but they can tell that like when they're infants? It's pretty complex for an infant, but
When the doctor sees the penis and says, this is a male, has the sex of male, that's an arbitrary distinction?
Telling that family, based on that little penis, that your child is absolutely 100% male identified, no matter what else occurs in their life, that's not correct.
So what is gender affirmation care you're a big proponent of? If we walk through, a child is sitting down with you, is questioning their gender. What's the gender affirmation process?
Affirmation means that as a pediatrician, as someone who says my job is to provide the best medical care for you, is I need to listen really carefully. And how I put it in words for kids so that they can understand it is, tell me your story. Where have you been in terms of your gender and your gender identity? Where are you right now? And more excitingly, where would you like to be in the future?
Have you ever met a 4-year-old who believes in Santa Claus?
Mm-hmm.
So this is someone who believes that a fat man is traveling through the sky on a flying reindeer at lightning speed, coming down his chimney with presents.
Yeah.
Would you say that this is someone who maybe has a tenuous grasp on reality?
They have an appropriate 4-year-old handle on the
Sure.
reality
Agreed.
that's very real for them.
Agreed, agreed. But Santa Claus is real for them, but
Yeah.
Santa Claus is not actually real.
Yeah, well, but Santa Claus does deliver their Christmas presents.
Well, yeah, but he's not real, though.
To that child, they are.
What? That, this goes back to like what I criticize, often is I'm gonna assume that she's one of those where you talk to them and she'll say, oh, I'm speaking my truth and you can speak your truth and their truth, and everybody has a truth, and it's like, no, there's one objective truth, right? How you kind of deal with that objective truth is subjective, absolutely. But nobody has their own individual truth. They have their own experiences in life, right? But the truth doesn't change from person to person. It's strange to me, because now one thing that I noticed at the end, and we'll go back a little bit, she uses a lot of circular reasoning, which is obviously, a logical fallacy. But I mean, for someone who says, is as educated and as a credential as she has, like, for her to be able to use like that logical fallacy, doesn't seem to fit. And her tonality, like at what she said at the very end, like, or even, with the screen you see now, seems a little condescending, and pretentious. But let's listen to that again.
Have an appropriate 4-year-old handle on the
Sure.
reality
Agreed.
that's very real for them.
Agreed, agreed. But Santa Claus is real for them, but
Yeah.
Santa Claus is not actually real.
Yeah, well, but Santa Claus does deliver their Christmas presents.
Well, yeah, but he's not real, though.
To that
Yeah.
child, they are.
When I see a child who, believes in Santa Claus, and then let's say this is a boy and he says, I'm a girl.
She's having a bedtime.
This is someone who can't distinguish between fantasy and reality, so how could you take that as a reality?
I would say that as a pediatrician and as a parent, I would say how wonderful my 4-year-old and their imagination is.
One of the hardest things as we did this film, especially in interviewing somebody like that, is not like my instinct just to yell at them to begin with. But
Yeah, you gotta maintain.
that's not
time.
what it's kind of a short film if it's just me going around yelling at people. The objective here is to ask questions, and that's all we did through the whole film. Is ask questions.
I've said that in another video. When you meet somebody and perhaps you don't share the same views or beliefs as them, and you know for a fact that their opinion isn't based on any factual evidence or any reality, you ask questions enough and they find themselves in a hole, because it all becomes circular reasoning to be able to justify what it is they actually believe. I don't think a lot of people realize that they only believe things solely because they were told to believe things. Like, it's not many people that you come across that can give you original thought. Most of it is like regurgitated nonsense. It's something they heard and sounded nice or sounded cool or fun, happy, but it isn't based on any reality. So we'll get back to it.
Questions. And let gender ideology essentially hang itself is the idea. and to show, is this something that can withstand scrutiny or not, even just basic scrutiny? And what we discovered is that it can't. So what's happening in that exchange is, first of all, she says, talking about a child who sits down with her, is she wants to know about their gender journey and where would you like to be in the future? So she's talking about a child's like 5-year gender plan. But the point I was trying to get across to her is that children don't have a grasp on reality. I mean, even if in theory people could choose their own gender, which they can't, but if they could, it wouldn't make sense to say that a child could choose it. Children believe in Santa Claus. So like, what do they know about reality?
Right.
If a child is 4 years old and believes that not only Santa Claus is real, but that fairies and dragons, and lives appropriately in this kind of fantasy world, and then the boy says that I'm a girl, that claim exists within the same fantasy world. This is just imagination. This is a kid who just doesn't understand the distinction between fantasy and reality. So how can they make these determinations? But then again, as we found there, Michelle wouldn't even affirm that Santa doesn't exist. So I was unclear about that also. Like, do you actually think that Santa exists? What's happening? But it's as you're talking to these people, it's like you feel yourself going slightly insane.
It's true. Sometimes you have like conversations with people, and their opinions are just like completely just absurd. And in order to be able to justify like their own reasoning, they will often like they have to, right? Because of what they believe in, they often have to stand by like just nonsense, right? Like he said, the fact that she seemed to be okay with the fact and saying that Santa Claus is real, right? Obviously, I could kind of understand what she was saying, like it's real for them, right? Absolutely, it's real for them, but for them, dragons and dinosaurs or whatever, and then having their imagination, all that stuff is real for them, but objectively, it's not.
So it was a pretty bewildering exchange there, but it only gets weirder from here. Let's keep watching.
Male gametes. That's what makes me male.
No, your sperm don't make you male.
Then what does?
It's a constellation.
In reality, in truth, okay?
Whose truth are we talking about?
The same truth that says we're sitting in this room right now, you and I.
No, you're not listening.
If I see
Sorry, that's really annoying when somebody has that like condescending tone. Sorry, condescending tone. And then, like I said earlier, right? She says, "Whose truth?"
a chicken laying eggs and I say that's a female chicken laying eggs, did I assign female, or am I just observing a physical reality that's happening in the world?
Does a chicken have gender identity? Does a chicken cry?
Well,
Does a chicken commit suicide? Let's
What does that have to do
frame
with-
it, because you're trying
The chicken has sex like any
a chicken
biological
has
organism.
an assigned gender, but a chicken doesn't have a gender identity.
So
I've brought this up before, but people need to know that gender is not a real thing, right? It only exists as a construct that as a society we agreed upon. And I suggest you guys do your research within regards to the social scientists that came up with the idea of gender, right? But it's not a very good history of how that came to be. So, yeah, I don't know.
we assign female to chickens when they lay eggs?
We
That's
assume they're female if they lay eggs.
That
I mean, that would assume that the chicken has an identity, though, and is self-conscious enough to extrapolate the difference between temperaments amongst genders. But they don't. So obviously the chicken doesn't. But you can affirm whether a chicken is male or female. Right?
right there will go down for me as maybe one of the most probably, and every other thing that makes it on this particular list is also happened in the film, but certainly one of the most outrageous exchanges I've ever had with anybody. And of course, see, this is what happens when you start asking questions to the proponent of gender ideology, is they end up backing themselves into various corners, and they have to make increasingly more wild sort of claims to get themselves out of the corners that they've backed themselves into. And so when you're talking about sex, for example, like it's all on a spectrum, and sex is something that is, as she says in our conversation, she says that sex is assigned at birth, that just like doctors are just deciding this kind of arbitrarily. Well, if that's the nature of sex, then what about other organisms aside from human beings? Okay, we would also say that when a chicken is laying eggs, oh, well, that's a female chicken. Are we assigning that? Is that just something we've decided that the chicken is female? Or is the chicken female? And if the chicken is female, then that would tell us something about the nature of biological sex, which is that it's not assigned, it is observed. But she can't go along with that, and so she starts talking about the chicken's gender identity and whether chickens commit suicide. And it doesn't get much better from there.
What age does the medical transition begin with medication?
So medical affirmation begins when the patient says they're ready for it. So that could be a kiddo who is just starting puberty and panicking because they're getting breast buds, or their penis is getting bigger and busier, and they're worried about all kinds of masculine changes. And that way, puberty blockers, which are completely reversible and don't have permanent effects, are wonderful because we can put that pause on puberty. Just like if you were listening to music, you put the pause on.
I'm sorry, but she's a doctor. I mean, a quick Google search will tell you that what she just said is false. And this is her profession.
And we stop the blockers, and puberty would go right back to where it was. The next note in the song just delayed that period of time.
So this is a part from later in the film as we start getting into more of the specifics here about puberty blockers. And I'm not going to say myself right now a lot in response to that, because you have to go watch the film. Because, as I said, I'm asking questions, and we don't just ask questions of people on this side. We bring in other people. So there's a little bit of a back and forth here, but we're going to get a response in the film to this claim that puberty can just be, just pause it, as she says, like music. Does the human body work that way? I mean, is that the way it works? Where you can take a drug to intentionally interfere with certain normal, healthy processes, and you could take, and then there's no negative consequences at all?
How complex is the human body? Like, to think you can just do that without consequence. The ego in that alone. And then just the fact that it's false, like, that's what to me is disturbing, right? Is if you were to ask me, I don't think she believes what she's saying. I think there's an agenda, and I think there's money to be made on her end that pushes the narrative forward. But I mean, you can't possibly be 100% certain or sure that is the case, right? I mean, imagine being able to take any type of drug or medicine and say absolutely 0%, no side effects, negative side effects or anything like that, and you can just resume your normal life after the fact. Even Tylenol has side effects.
Just stop taking the drug and pick up where you left off? Which, of course, the interesting thing is that even if that was true, which it isn't, as you'll see in the film, but even if it was true, well, then wouldn't that mean, I mean, if a child's taking puberty blockers to stop their normal development, and then we're just putting it on pause for, let's say, 5 years, and then they decide that, okay, I don't want to take this anymore, well, at a minimum, now they're going to be 5 years behind in their growth and development. So even according to her version of events, like at a minimum, you're going to have stunted growth and you're going to have someone who is behind in their physical development. But actually, the consequences are a lot worse than that, as we discover in the film and as we get into in this next exchange about the puberty blockers themselves. What are they? What do they do? What is their actual purpose? Let's watch that.
One of the drugs used is Lupron, right? Which has actually been used to chemically castrate sex offenders.
You know what? I'm not sure that we should continue with this interview because it seems like it's going in a particular direction.
Well, you're a medical professional.
I am a medical professional.
So you don't want to talk about the drugs that you give to kids, or?
Again, I'm a physician and I use medication. You're choosing exploitive words. Drugs I give to kids.
I'm choosing a
chemical
word
castration.
that was in a dictionary.
That's not a correct term for puberty blocking.
I could look it up on my phone, but I'm pretty sure if I looked it up,
You can look it up on your phone.
It says medical definition: the administration of a drug to bring about a marked reduction in the body's production of androgens and especially testosterone.
And I'm saying, as a pediatrician who takes care of hundreds of these kids, when you use that terminology, you are being malignant and harmful.
I mean, there are some who would say that giving chemical castration drugs to kids is malignant and harmful.
Yeah.
It's about the context of caring for a child and seeing.
Caring, she says caring for a child by giving them chemical castration, and you're choosing what's best for them. Doesn't make sense to me.
The suffering that kids can have that have not been in affirmative home situations.
So that was the part in our conversation where things got a bit contentious. But I wouldn't say that's when they started to get contentious. Actually, what we discovered in doing these interviews is that I kind of knew going in. I had certain points in mind where I thought, okay, well, when I ask this question, things might get a little bit tense, and I kind of know, well, because that's more of a challenging question. And what I found so often in these interviews is that things got tense much earlier than I originally thought they would, because there were questions that I thought would be really easy for the person.
I think the reason they get tense early on with people like this is their view of reality and what their opinions and what they believe is so fragile that it's almost as if they're standing on glass, and any sudden movement, any way or shift in weight is going to break that. And it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, right, where there's this personas, but it's so fragile, and so they become defensive of it because they know how fragile their ideologies are, so they become defensive.
Person that I'm talking to that turned out not to be easy at all. Questions like, what's the difference between sex and gender? These are like, that's supposed to be a softball, but even that, things start to go off the rails in a lot of these interviews when I ask even a question like that. Because what we found is that these people, these gender ideologues, especially the ones who are in this industry and they're making a lot of money off of promoting gender confusion, especially in kids, it's that what we found is that they are not prepared to encounter any skepticism at all. They're not prepared to answer any questions. The only questions they're prepared to answer are the questions that are not really questions at all, right? Questions like, how?
I think it speaks to the ego, right? Of you shouldn't even challenge me, right? As if to say that you shouldn't question it. And if that's not like fascist or authoritarian, I don't know what is. And I know they're like super against that, but I mean, that is what it is. The moment you can't like question them or call them out on their BS, and they will attack you. I mean, you can like, you can't speak on certain subjects because you might lose your job or be called names or have your career ruined because you had a different opinion. that seems dangerous to me, right? That's why, like, nowadays, a lot of people are so careful with what they say on social media or just out in public, because anything that doesn't fit the narrative of certain protected groups, like, it's like digging yourself a hole. You might as well just dig yourself a hole, you know? I think that's dangerous precedent, but
How meaningful is it to you to be able to help people in their gender journey, like that, those kind of questions, where it's just a setup for them to give a pre-planned, canned, speech? So by the time we got to this exchange, it had already gotten pretty tense, and of course I asked her about Lupron. Now this is a drug that she gives to kids, and as we hear from somebody else in the film, Scott Nugent, who has experience with these kinds of drugs, personal experience, this drug in particular is a drug. It is actually, by definition, chemical castration, which is why I wasn't planning on doing this, but I pulled out my phone, look up the definition of chemical castration. She says that chemical castration, that's a exploitative word, and I'm being malignant and harmful by using that word. Well, which is why I wasn't planning on doing this, but I pulled out my phone, look up the definition of chemical castration. She says that chemical castration, that's a exploitative word, and I'm being malignant and harmful by using that word. Well, look up the definition of chemical castration, and that is a puberty blocker. That is, by definition, when you give a kid a puberty blocker, you are performing chemical castration on the kid, period. And we know that because Lupron specifically has been used to chemically castrate sex offenders.
how do you guys feel about that, though? Like, giving that to kids. Now, just so you can kind of get an idea of what I'm trying to convey is, I'll use myself as an example, right? As you grow up, there's like phases that you kind of go through and things that you want to do, and you swear up and down it's the right thing to do, and you want this, you're never going to regret it, and you make choices solely based on like your grasp on reality at the time, right? Especially when you're a young kid. But how many of us haven't grown up to regret certain things, decisions, or said, like, you know what, maybe it wasn't the smartest thing I did there. But then take that to the extent of chemical castration or cutting up your bodies at that point. And a lot of these things are permanent. I can't imagine the regret that would happen after the fact. You know, that's where I kind of have an issue with it. I don't think kids at that age or even I'll include myself or anybody that I know, we're ready to make that important of a life decision like that.
You notice in that exchange, by the way, she didn't deny. She takes issue with the words that I'm using. She threatens to get up and storm out. She's offended by the way that I'm phrasing it, the words. But she never says, oh no, that's totally incorrect. Lupron does not do that. Lupron's never been used that way. Doesn't say that, because she can't. And then finally, of course, we get to the question, which is the question I ask everyone, and which is, what is a woman? And probably is not going to surprise you by now that she doesn't exactly have an answer for it, but let's listen to what she comes up with.
So we're going on this journey. Boys can be girls, girls can be boys, men can be women, women can be men. It makes me wonder, what is a woman?
What is a woman? A woman is someone who claims that as their identity. It could be many things.
Listen to the mental gymnastics and circular reasoning. Pay attention to it.
To many people.
That was her answer. Well, a woman is anyone. And that was, by the way, not to give any spoilers away, but that is the answer from the left to the question, which is a non-answer. It's the same thing as not answering at all. But that is the answer. A woman is someone who says they're a woman. And of course, to everyone who gives me that answer in the film, I have the follow-up. Well, a woman is someone who identifies as a woman. What are they identifying as? And around we go. Because they don't have an answer to the question.
Yeah.
This is a medical doctor who can't tell you what a woman is. I mean, this is someone who
crazy.
If someone goes to her and says, as a man, and says, I'm really a woman and I want to transition into a woman, she will help facilitate that process, and yet she doesn't know what the word means. She doesn't actually know, by her own testimony, when someone says, I want to transition.
Here's my question. if you can't then define what a woman or man is, it doesn't matter. Like if you yourself can't define that with some substance, how do you know what that person who's like, let's say you have a guy who's identifying as a woman, how do you know what it's going to take to have them transition into that thing that they identify as if you don't know what that thing is? Like that's where I have another piece of contention with it. You don't know what a woman is, or you're unwilling to define it. Yet if I were to come and say I identify as a woman, you say, oh well, we're going to do these things, right? But you don't know what that thing is, so how are you going to help me get to that point if you don't know what that end goal is? You can't define it yourself. So what are we doing? It seems like there's something else behind that, right? I mean, am I crazy?
To a woman, she doesn't even know what that means. Like, what are you transitioning into?
Right, right.
She has no idea.
Exactly.
As we found over and over again in the film. And that was just a few minutes of the film. Only one person of the dozens that we spoke to. And I can tell you right now that what we heard in those clips there, I don't think any of it qualifies as quite the craziest thing we heard. The chicken part gets pretty close, still not all the way there. There's so much more that you need to see, but you have to go to whatisawoman.com and subscribe to see it. A lot more where that came from, I promise you.
Yeah, I definitely recommend, like I said, the entire documentary. I've seen it now at least 2 times in its entirety, and I've seen people kind of speak about it. It's really good. It's really good because a lot of times, one of the questions that comes out a lot in the documentary is the fact that even he gets asked, right? Like, why do you why do you care? Like, why are you so interested in asking what a woman is? As if asking it invokes some sort of like offensive reaction. Like, I don't like they see it as, it's not what you're asking, it's how you're asking it. But what is a woman? And I think what he's trying to kind of make aware is the fact that like the lunacy behind all of it, right? Because again, I'm not gonna spoil the entire documentary. I suggest that you definitely watch it and give props to the man. But it's there's things that you have to be able to question, right? And when you're not allowed to, when your life is destroyed by just by asking questions, how dangerous is that, right? So when you ask like what is a woman, it's to kind of highlight the fact that they're so protected by it that it's dangerous for you to question anything as if they're the ones with the authority over everybody else and they get to dictate the conversation, or where conversations go, pandering to them in every way, shape, or form, because God forbid you get canceled because you said the wrong thing or asked the wrong questions, right? And he's gotten a lot of hate for it. Again, I've posted other videos and I got a lot of stuff for it. I've lost friends. People stopped talking to me. All kinds of stuff. And it's not because you're offensive, but when you state facts, when you question people, and that causes outrage, that to me is just, it's insane, right? If I held a view, you're more than welcome to question it because I am not above you. And I feel like a lot of people who believe this do feel that way, as if I'm above you, don't question me, I know more than you, right? And you questioning me, like, how dare you type thing. So, anyways, I want to leave it there, right? So, anyways, I do want to leave it there. What do you guys think of this clip? What do you guys think of the entire subject? Am I out of my mind? Is Matt Walsh out of his mind? Is that doctor out of his mind? Watch the documentary. There's so much there that can be absorbed, and it makes you think. It's a really good piece, and I'm glad that he did it. I'm glad he had the courage to do so. And I mean, that's in some of itself, right? Having the courage to ask questions sounds insane to me. But anyways, yeah, give me your thoughts. You know, comment on the video, share it, like it, don't like it, talk your ish. You know what I mean? I don't mind. And if you're offended, I'm sorry to say, but take a deep breath and walk it off. um, Other than that, I will see you guys later. Have a wonderful weekend and peace out.